Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, all listeners of our four waves webinars. And today we are on the third webinar, and the topic of this webinar is food. How 10 billion people in 2050 will survive, and what they will eat, and how the future of our most important part of our life, I mean food, will be look like. It's a very important webinar, not just because it's like very sensitive question for emergency countries, but also because the wave of change and the wave of huge demand, what will coming now from the third and fourth wave countries, will change a lot. And also the influence will be not only in their countries, but the whole planet. So Alexander will give all these details for us in this webinar. Alexander, please.
Yeah, hi everybody. Today I will give you the broad overview of the topic of feeding the world for the previous 200 years and for the next 100 years. So this is like a 300 years overview. And that is important because agriculture and the other connecting industries like refrigerating, like distribution, like logistics and so forth, they are one of the foundational industry for human being, for our survival, for our prosperity, and for everything. And I will show you this 300 years through the prism of 4Waves approach, because this is the only and very reasonable approach. It will help you to understand the huge difference in the past, in the present, in the future between the countries from different waves, from the first wave, from the third and fourth waves, and you will understand much better why this difference happened and why it's so important to understand this difference. And the second thing I will tell you about, I will describe so-called total productivity factors, of total factors of productivity, which are crucial for increasing the general harvesting, the volume of food we produce. I will show you how these factors worked for the last 200 years and what's the problem with these factors we have for the next 100 years. And the third very important topic I will tell you about is the climate change, like a totally new factor for agriculture and for food production. And this is very crucial factor. It is so important that we could say that in the next several decades, we need to reinvent agriculture, because many of existing well-known traditional technologies, approaches, methods for food production doesn't work anymore. So we need to find another ways to produce meat, milk, cereals, and many other things. And I will tell you about this. And the more general problem is the environmental impacts of food production to the whole planet. And this is not only about climate change, but about many other aspects. And I hope after this explanation, you will understand much better what problems are facing right now, and what problems will develop. And that's why the feeding the world in 21st century will be extremely important topic for everybody. As you remember from the previous webinars, I explained to you that the main mega trend and the most important trend which affects us for the last 300, at least 250 years, is the great transition from agrarian era to modern era, from agrarian countries and societies to modern countries and societies. And this process started in 18th century in several European countries. And I explained to you that this process will involve all countries in the world, but in the different times. That is the main criteria for dividing countries which are in a group of countries in the first wave, and a second wave, and a third wave. The first wave countries started this mega transition in 18th and 19th century. So they passed these 200 years through this huge transition from agrarian era to urban, industrialized, energy, technological era, modern era. And this short name is for modern era. And people who are living now in the cities, who have food from the supermarkets, they could not understand how the rest of the world is living right now. Because the second wave countries started this mega transition only in the middle of 20th century, so 60, 70 years ago. And these countries made a huge progress for these 60, 70 years. Like, you know, you've heard everybody about Singapore, about Asian tigers like South Korea, like Taiwan, then China, a leader, Mexico, Brazil. So these all countries are from the second wave countries. And the third wave countries started this mega transition, again, being in a level of agrarian societies at the end of 20th century. So it happened only 30 years ago. And these countries mostly are from South Asia, and the fourth wave countries are from sub-Saharan Africa. And this is a big difference between Asian countries and sub-Saharan Africa countries. So that is why I divided these countries for third and fourth wave countries. And these countries started this the great transition recently. And this mega transition includes several different so-called like sub-transitions. I told you in the previous webinar about demographic transition from the standards and the rules and the habits of agrarian society in point of reproduction and the population growth or degrowth, and to modern society. And today I will tell you about the second transition, the most important, the dietary transition. From the diet and the way of food production, which was typical for agrarian era, to modern diet and modern way of producing and distributing and the food. So the first, this is very interesting view when you understand that all waves at the beginning of this transition are at the level when the previous wave was like maybe 100 years ago, maybe 60 years ago, but they all started from the level, from a very low level, which is typical for agrarian countries. And if you look to the first wave countries, most of them are so-called Western world. It's European countries, it's Northern American countries, it's Japan, New Zealand and Australia and several other countries, and Japan and the Soviet Union, which were one of the last, but nevertheless it was in the first wave countries. These countries started this mega transition and dietary transition in 19th century from the very low level of consumption. They had, now I will tell you a general explanation of the dietary transition. The dietary transition include the transition from the diet of 300 kilograms per year per capita, mostly cereals, roots, and pulses, to 900 kilograms per capita per year, and a very varied diet, like where cereals and roots and pulses are still in this diet, but in a level even less than it was in the agrarian era. For example, if people in the agrarian era used 300 kilos of cereals, pulses, and roots, in a modern diet, they use less than 200 kilograms of cereals, roots, and pulses, but they use like 100 or 150 kilograms of milk. They use 100 kilograms of meat and more different main foods. And when the first wave countries started, they consumed like 300 kilograms of cereals, roots, and pulses, and about, for example, 15 kilograms per year of meat. Now they consume like 90 or 120, like the US consume, kilograms of meat per year per capita. And this is the huge growth and the huge progress. They consume, I will tell you, they consume 100 kilograms of milk 200 years ago. Now they consume 300 or 350 kilograms of milk per capita per year. And this is the huge progress for these countries. But the interesting thing is, if we go to the middle of 20th century, you could see that the first wave countries where less than 1 billion people lived in this time produce approximately 50% for all the most important items like cereals, meat, milk, eggs, and so forth. So the other 3 billion, approximately 2.5 billion people in the middle of 20th century produce another 50%. So that means that during this great transition and during this dietary transition, the first wave countries with a population of less than 30% of the world population produced 50% of the world food. And then from the middle of 20th century, the second wave countries started this dietary transition. For example, when China started this dietary transition, it consumed only 4 kilograms of meat, and now per person. And now, after 60 years of this progress, they consume 60 kilograms per capita per year. And at the beginning, the population in China was 500 million people. And now it grew for approximately 1 billion for this period. So that means that the production of meat increased, like you need to take this 3 times growth in population and 10 times growth in per capita consumption. So that means 3 per 10, 30 times increase in production. And so many countries in the second wave demonstrated the same progress. But if you look at the third wave countries right now, you will see that most of them consume at the level of agrarian era. Of course, they grow up for the last 100 years, but they still are at the so low level of consumption that the difference in specific items is from 2 to 10 times from the level of the third and fourth waves countries and the leaders in the first and the second wave countries. That is why we understand, we could predict for sure that for the rest of the 21st century, the main demand for food will go from the third and fourth wave countries. And the population now in these countries are approximately 3 billion people. And of course, the second wave countries, they are now in a level of about 60% from the level of first wave countries still in per capita consumption. That means that the second, third, and fourth waves will give us demand for at least increasing for 2 to 10 times for different items in the food basket. If we take the main type of food like vegetable, fruits, sweeteners, and so forth, for the next 80 years. We don't know when it happened and when African countries or when the third wave countries will reach this level of the first wave countries. But we understand, especially having these last 60 years of development of the second wave countries, we understand that it's doable. They will do it because this is the social economic law. People and governments want to live better, want to live from agrarian era to urban era, from the era without electricity to the era with 10,000 kilowatt per year of electricity, from era without tractors to the era with tractors. So that's the law. And that is why we could predict that the huge growth in food demand in the 21st century. And when different experts started trying to predict how much food do we need by 2050 or by 2060 or by the end of this century, they are usually using a lot of detailed calculation from country to country, from population to population. But if you use this 4 waves approach, you will calculate it easily, because you will see that, for example, what we know that in 60 years ago, in 1961, when the Food and Agriculture Organization statistics started for all countries, Australia produced the same amount of milk than the whole Africa, 1 million ton a year. And now Africa produced 50 million tons, 50 million tons. So it increased for 50 years, it increased 50 times. So that's because the population grew and because the African countries or the fourth waves countries started to go and to prepare for this great transition. Because this is the interesting thing is when the great transition started, usually we don't see the previous several decades of preparation for this. The authority, the people in the governments and the regional authorities, they receive the education, they understand better the best practice from the countries, from the neighbor countries, they understand better the world experience, and they receive a lot of international support, advices, and so forth. So that means that we are sure that the third and fourth wave countries will demonstrate the same huge jump like the second wave countries demonstrated in the last 60 years. So that means that we know that in the next decades, by 2050, by the end of 21st century, we will see the increasing demand for food from 2 to 10 times from existing level. The question is how to increase the general production, the production of all kind of food, and how to help these countries from the third and fourth wave to go to the modern diet from 300 kilograms to 900 kilograms, from 1,500 kilocalories per capita per day to 3,500 kilocalories per capita per day, from 90% carbohydrate and 10% of proteins and fat to 60% of hydrocarbons and 40% of proteins and fat. So these all elements are describing the dietary transition principles. So, and we hope that at the end of 21st century, all 11 billion of people will live, will have the diet of the modern society. But could we do it? Now I will explain to you which factors we could use and that these factors will work in the 21st century. Yeah.
Alexander, I have a question. From 2 to 10 times increase, we expected, yeah? Why is the range so big?
The range is so big because there is a huge difference. There is a huge difference between different kind of food. For example, between countries and between countries and between countries from different waves. For example, as I said, all countries in the world 200 years ago and even now has in the foundation of the diet cereals, roots, and pulses. Mm-hmm. That's the tradition what came with which came to us from agrarian 10,000 years of experience. So our diet is based on cereals, roots, and pulses. So all countries, even now, even 100 years ago, African countries and the third wave countries and the first wave countries produced approximately the same amount of cereals per capita, because this is a basic. If you need to have 1,500 kilocalories per day, you need to eat different kind of cereals and pulses and potatoes and batat and cassava and all these roots. But when you take, if you take like the fourth wave countries or the third wave countries, you could see that 90% in the diet of people from these countries are still cereals and roots and pulses, and only 10% are all others: vegetables, fruits, fish, milk, eggs, sweeteners, and all other items. And that is why the difference is so huge. Because, for example, many countries in Africa don't consume fish. So they have less than 1 kilogram of fish per capita. And the developed countries consume 22 kilograms per capita. So that means that we know for sure that there are a lot of like different cultural difference from region to region. For example, many countries are like Japan, Indonesia, and so forth. They are like the oceanic-based countries, so they consume a lot of fish. But in other regions like Middle East, they consume a lot of meat, or South America. But if you forget about this difference and you combine countries in a ways, you will see the more or less the same diet with the same parameters. So that is why we understand that the milk, I will give you, this is the great example. The milk, the developed countries now consume about 250 kilograms per year, the meat. The fourth wave countries consume about 100. China consumes 20 kilograms of milk. We don't know, will China increase it 5 times, or this is a specific of China? Because China is a world leader in the vegetable consumption now. They consume about 400 kilograms a year. You remember? When they started, they consumed 300 kilograms a year per capita of cereals, roots, and pulses. And now they consume 400 kilograms only vegetables. So And the first wave countries consume about 100 or 120 kilograms of vegetables. But the third wave countries consume about 20 or 80, between 20 and 80 kilograms of vegetables. So that means that they will increase 5 times in vegetable consumptions if they started from 20 kilograms per capita. And same the first wave countries. That is why this difference for different types of food is so huge.
If we are looking from 4Waves approach, it doesn't matter the culture difference specifically, yeah? Because in the general, you see the demand will be super huge, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
And 2 times it's already super big. I'm even not talking about 10 times, yeah? So please go ahead to the next one. Yeah.
So what we know that the normal, the healthy level of consumption of milk is about between 150 and 250 kilograms. So that's what we know, that most countries will reach the level of one country, 150 kilograms. If they have now 10 kilograms of milk, that means that sooner or later they will reach 100 kilograms or 150 kilograms. They will not reach the highest level, but they will reach the minimum level of the comfortable, I call this comfortable level of consumption. And there is a gap in this comfortable level, but they will reach it. So now I will go to the total factor of productivities, and will tell you about each factor, how it worked before, and will it work in the 21st century. The first and the most important factor for agriculture, that's clear, is the land area. And first time in the history, in our 200, one important remark I want to say, that 250 years ago, there was the momentum in the human history. Before this starting of this the great transition from agrarian to modern era, what we know about the previous 10,000 years or the previous 100,000 years is called, this is the period with which the economists and the philosophers called the Malthusian Trap. So during this huge period of time, the level of consumption was very low, and the death rate was very high, and the population didn't grow. And there were no like machinery, there were no fertilizers, there were no increasing in food consumption. And only starting 18th century, we see for the last 250 years, the long-term, sometimes exponential, or in some parameters, exponential growth, in some parameters, linear, geometrical, and so, but this is incredible, 250 years period in our history. This is a period of absolute progress. We could say that comparing to the previous era, we could say that we are living in the best period in our history. So you need to understand it and to go from the 2020 year, from the short-term point, that this level, what we reach now, especially in the first wave countries and in the second wave countries, not for 100% of people. There is a huge difference even in every year, every country. If you take like UK, US, Russia, Japan, and so forth, you have this inequality, we have a different level of wealth and so on. This is different topic. This is different aspects. It's important, but it's different. But for general, for the humanity like at all, for sure, it's the period of the extreme progress. And this progress based on a the very important aspects. And one of them is, so we invented hydrocarbons. We invented coal, oil, natural gas, which gave us such a huge amount of energy, what never happened before. And this amount of energy gave us a chance to create a huge amount of technologies, which gave us the huge amount of job, like in terms of joules, and this is like physical world. That is the main like lever of our wellness now. So one of the most important factor of productivity for agriculture is land area. And the first time in our history, right now, we have a huge problem with this specific factor. If we look for this for the last 200 years, you could see that we started rapidly increased the agricultural area for both types of, for cropland and for grazing, starting 1800. We doubled the area, the land area in the 19th century. And the main part of this increasing was from the expansion of immigrants from Europe to the new empty, or more or less empty lands in Northern America. That is how the United States and Canada were founded, and to New Zealand and Australia. That is how these countries like happened in our history. So these 4 territories gave to Europe the area of the land area bigger than the Europe had before for centuries. But we doubled we doubled first time from 1.5 billion hectares in 1800 to 2.5 billion of hectares in 1900. But then we doubled in the 20th century. We doubled second time from 2.5 billion to 5 billion hectares. But if we look, yes, and what we understand now, we don't have any chance not to double the land area in the 21st century, but according to all experts and the Food and Drug Administration, we maybe will increase in 5 to 10% the total agricultural area, and that's the end for the humanity. If we looked at the whole land area at Earth, you'll see that it's equal 150 million of square kilometers. In square kilometers, it's easy for me, but you could multiple to 100 and you will have billions of hectares. So if you go to 300 years ago, you could see that the forest the area of forest was 60 million square kilometers. And the agricultural area, including all kind of settlings of humans, was 10 million square kilometers. So forest 60 and a human 10. Now, after 200 years of mega transition and extension of land area for agriculture, first of all, we have 50 million of square kilometers of agricultural lands and 40 million kilometers of forest. So we cut the forest area at least for 20 million, so for third. But if we look at the long term for more than 200 years, you understand that from pre-industrial era, we cut the area of forest at the earth for 50%. So, and this is one of the main cause of climate change. It's a well-known fact, but we don't discuss what to do from this, but this is the fact that we extended the agricultural lands and we cut or destroy forests approximately in the same amount or maybe a little bit less. So for different countries, this situation is different because, for example, India and Nigeria are using approximately 70 to 80% of maximum maximum lands for agricultural use right now. But Brazil, despite Brazil extending agricultural land for 10 times for the last 100 years, it still has is still using about only 30% of the potential agricultural lands. But what we know from Brazil, that one of the main reasons for shrinking the forests in Amazon River area is development of cattle farming. So people produce more meat for export, first of all, and they, in different ways, they destroy forests. They extend the area of farming, and that means that the farming is competing with forests for the land that now in the earth, in the whole planet. So the land factor doesn't work anymore. If we look at the animals, because land is important for plant-based products. And the interesting thing is that from 50 million square kilometers, which now we use for agriculture, 40 million are using for animals, and only 10 million are using for like a croplands. So that means that we produced our foundational products like cereals, pulses, and roots from 10 million square kilometers till now. And we are using 40 million square kilometers for grazing and for animals, for feeding animals. And for animals, the main factor of productivity is the number of heads, the number of animals. We increased this number for the last 60 years amazingly, I could say, or I could say horribly. So if we go 60 years ago, there were about 1 billion heads if we count all kind of animals, cattle and chickens and poultry and different kinds. And now, there were 7 billion. Sorry, there were 7 billion heads of this all kinds of animals in 1961, and now we have more than 30 billion heads. And from these 30 billion heads, about 27 are chicken only. And the main growth of chickens happened in a second and third wave countries in Asia and Latin America and Central and South America for the last 60 years. So, and for example, the number of cattle or cows extended from 900 million to 1.7 billion heads for the last 60 years. But if we know that we need to increase the milk production at least for 3 times in this century, and meat production between 2 and 3 times, we could say we produce now 300 million tons of meat. But if we look at the world with 10 billion modern people, or people who transited to modern world, we could count that we need to produce meat in a number between 600 and 900 million tons. That is why people are talking about artificial meat and the other ways, because we understand that we could not extend the number of animals. Why? Because we don't have additional land for grazing, and we know that meat production, but not only meat production, that is the trick, because the main number of these cows are using for milk production, not for meat production. If we are struggling with meat production, we need to think about milk production. That is why I like to look at the Gates Energy Breakthrough Initiative activity. They are financing different kind of new technologies which could supply the existing traditional technologies like meat to artificial meat, or they are investing now in the companies who are working on a artificial milk that it is not the dry milk from cows. It's artificially created milk. But what we know that we could not increase in 2 or 3 times the number of animals for milk and meat production. So that is the real fact, yeah, we have now. And the next factor of productivity are fertilizers for plants and feed for animals. The fertilizers is a very important topic. Yeah, sorry, and I need to go back. What we know now that the existing number of cattle or cows produce one of the most aggressive greenhouse gases, methane. And this volume of methane emission increased for several times for the last 50 years. And we know for sure that we could not continue to increase the number of cows, but we need to increase because we need more milk and more meat for the 3rd and 4th wave countries, yeah? So this is a huge dilemma. If we increase it, we will produce more methane. And what I expect, that is why I'm so pessimistic in all our attempts to fight the climate change, because I understand for sure that we could not change very fast or fast enough for complete curing the climate, the existing ways of production of energy, food, and everything what we produce now. So now I will go to fertilizers. The fertilizers were crucial for 20th century. Before, one of the most important inventions what had happened in the beginning of 20th century was the invention of industrial way of nitrogen fertilizer production. So this reaction is called like Haber-Bosch reaction. This reaction has using the natural gas, methane, and for producing of artificial nitrogen fertilizers. But the most important role of these fertilizers, these fertilizers started to play from the 2nd wave countries beginning of growth, from the mid of 20th century. Before mid of 20th century, the total volume of fertilizer production was about like 10 million tons at all. But right now, we produce about 100 million tons of nitrogen fertilizers and about 50 million tons of phosphorus fertilizers. We produce phosphorus fertilizers from phosphorus rocks, so-called. And the most important field for these fertilizers are Moroccan mountains. So we produce really phosphorus fertilizers from rock. And the growth of fertilizers was crucial because it helped at least to double the yield of plants. So without fertilizers, we will get at least twice less cereals, the global cereals production. But with fertilizers, we increase the productivity of plant production significantly. And what we know for sure, that for the next 100 years, we need at least it to increase to from 5 to 10 times for different countries, the production of and using of nitrogen fertilizers and the phosphorus fertilizers, because the third and fourth wave countries use per hectare 10 times, 5 times less fertilizers than the leaders in this field. The interesting thing is that the nitrogen fertilizers brought us two big global problems. One problem is so-called eutrophication of soil and water. So this process has another name of dead water zones. When the fertilizers are going with rain to the rivers and the seas and the oceans, they gave it more food for plankton, for algae. Yeah, and this algae started to grow rapidly and to cover the surface, and the sun doesn't go deeper, and it breaks the whole process of photosynthesis and change the whole life in these zones. And fish couldn't live in these zones, and all other animals couldn't live there. And the second process is the nitrogen NO2 nitrogen oxide. This is aggressive greenhouse gas, and so when we increase the using of fertilizers, of nitrogen fertilizers, we have more and more emission of this aggressive gas to the atmosphere. So the interesting thing is about fertilizers is the focus regarding phosphorus fertilizers, because phosphorus now, as I said, is half of nitrogen fertilizers production, total production. But the specific of African soil is very interesting. The African soil demanding the phosphorus, first of all, not nitrogen. So that is why I looked at the forecast for the next, and one of the forecasts of FAO is amazing, that for the next 150 years, we will see increasing of phosphorus production, phosphorus fertilizers production in 2 to 3 times. And the main consumer will be sub-Saharan Africa countries. So they will consume, now we produce like 50 million tons of phosphorus, and by the end of this century, we will produce about 100. And from this 160 million tons will consume fourth wave countries. And now they consume like less than 10% from phosphorus. So this is the huge change in phosphorus distribution and the fertilizer distribution. So this is the main problem with fertilizers. And what about animal feed? Now we produce about 3 billion tons of cereals. At the beginning of 20th century, we produced just a second. We produced 90 million tons of cereals. Now we produce 3 billion tons of cereals. But from these 3 billion tons, only 1 billion is the human's food. And 1.3 billion is the animal feed. So we produce more than 50% of cereals. So that means that we use 50% of the cropland for animal feed. That means if we understand that for 4 billion for 4 billion existing people who are less for 2 to 10 times in their diet of milk and meat, and we will need to increase it like for several times in the 21st century. That means that we need to increase for several times cereals production for animal feed, not for human feed. That's interesting. And as I said, we don't have additional land for this. So this is again dilemma. The next factor is the water using and for irrigation and for better yields. But likeness, most areas in the world are don't need irrigation. We have enough precipitation. They have enough precipitation from natural cycle. But what is the problem with climate change? That the climate change started to change this regime, like the long-term, more or less stable regime of precipitations. And that is why we know for sure that we will see more often this bad weather conditions with more precipitations in the time when we don't expect it, or less precipitations. I read several articles about monsoons for Asia, because monsoons are crucial for Asia. And that is why these people from these regions are worried about climate change, because there is some evidences that with climate change, when the temperature will rise, the monsoons regime and direction could change. And if it happens, this huge region of the world, where like about 5 billion people has been living right now, yeah, they could suffer from lack of precipitations, and irrigation will not help us. Irrigation could help if we have like precipitation, but irrigation usually could not help if we don't have any precipitations. So, and the next thing we know about water, that we have water shortage and the developing of water deficit in many regions, especially in the regions when we have right now population boom and urbanization boom, because cities are struggling for water with agriculture, because cities consume much more water than the agrarian villages. So that's again like complicated topic about water. Then the important factor for agriculture is machinery number and the energy use. And what we know for the third and fourth wave countries, that they need to get much more machinery and much more electricity than they have now. Because, for example, for sub-Saharan Africa, for many countries, the situation is still typical for agrarian era. They don't have tractors, they don't have machineries, but the problem is that in this level of their development and in this level of GDP, they don't have capital to buy the fertilizers, to buy the tractors for them. So they need time for GDP growth. That is why GDP growth is the main goal for these countries for the next 50 years. And when they grow up GDP, they could buy fertilizers, they could buy tractors, they could buy best agricultural practices, they could use them in their lands. They will double or triple or like tenfolds increase the harvesting and the animal food and for their population. And in 50 years, we will see the new China from the third and fourth wave countries. But these have different problems, as I said. And one of the interesting thing is that the discussion about decreasing the losses and the waste in food industry, because in the first and the second wave countries, the waste from food is about 40 to 50%. And if we look globally, we have 1/3 of waste from the food we produced. So we harvested the plants, we grow animals, and so forth. Why it's so big? Because the cultural, our existing culture of food consumption include the restaurants, cafe, food to go, so pre-cooked food, salads, and so forth. And these industries are developing more and more and more because people don't like to cook at home. They prefer to buy food. But because of this hygiene and the many other requirements, you understand that if you have prepared cook, you need to use it in 24 hours, sometimes in 12 hours. And after that, you couldn't use it, you couldn't sell it. That is why to shrink, to cut the waste is one of the most difficult factor for 21st century. But the many experts are talking about this like the main opportunity, because if you don't have land, how to double the cereals? Okay, we need to cut losses and waste, but it's the same difficult solution for this, like to find a way how to double the harvest without doubling the land area. So that's and at the end, I will tell you about the factor of climate change. Now the food production industry has about 25-26% in a global greenhouse gases emission. And even only meat production has the same part in greenhouse gas emissions like all kind of transportation in the world. So the transportation sector, including 1.5 billion passenger cars, emit about 14% of the greenhouse gases, the total greenhouse gases. And only meat production emit about 12%. Same amount like steel plus cement. So these three sectors emit about same amount, but we are talking about agriculture. So that means that if we extend the food production using existing approach and existing technologies in the 21st century, that means that the agriculture or food production sector will bring additionally 2 or 3 times more greenhouse gases in the 21st century. And that is why I said before, I like the Energy Breakthrough Initiative activities, but like Václav Smil, one of my favorite experts, told about this, I don't believe that we could change and scale the solutions for many technologies and sectors and ways of and methods and many other aspects to supply existing technologies and existing approach to food production to something new. But we will listen more and more about artificial meat, artificial milk, artificial proteins, artificial something, yeah. Again, this initiative invested in a substitution of nitrogen fertilizer. They invested in a project, for example, which are using the soil bacteria to fix the atmospheric nitrogen to the soil. So if they find this solution, it will be that will be very important influence, because if we could use more bacteria and less artificially synthesized nitrogen, it will help to climate and to soils and to eutrophication. I'm sure it will bring the new problems with these bacteria. I'm sure that something happened from this technology, but nevertheless, it's important. And regarding climate change, one aspect is very important for food production, because what is the truth, or what the truth is, that for the next approximately 50 years, the growth of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is working like a fertilizer for plants. It will improve the process of photosynthesis, so the plants grow faster and better. And that is why in most projects, the most focus of IPCC and independent institutes who are working in this field, we could see that until 2070, we will see in all regions, in all zones, improving, like positive influence of CO2 concentration growth, not negative. But after 2070, in most zones, it will dramatically goes down. It will dramatically. And the problem is that if we could not change the trajectory, we could not change this growth of concentration, it will go exactly according to this scenario. So it will go down after this peak of productivity. And then the worst influence of climate change for agriculture, as I said, is not the concentration of CO2, but is a changing in a many parameters, which I call the invisible factors of productivity. Like I said about precipitation regiming. It's important not the amount of precipitation a year what we have, what this territory has, but the exact days and season, like spring and fall. We need, or we don't need precipitation in this period. We need in this period, but it could change. We need these specific bacteria for soil, but they could migrate because the temperature is growing. So many aspects of climate change now affecting the agriculture, which, like experts said, which have this 10,000 years ago, first time in the history, in the Earth history, we received this unique, stable climate period in 12,000 years. And we are living within this period, and now this started to change. And what the future looks like in terms of climate in 22nd century, we don't know, but for sure it will be something different than we had before. Yeah, enough right now.
Oh, yeah, Alexander, thank you for this. So let me count: land, heads, water, machinery,
fertilizers.
Yeah.
And animal feed.
Do you animal feed and waste? It's a sixth one, or it's a little bit different?
It's a different capital or investment, and the waste are different topics. This is not a factor of productivity. So factor of productivity means that if you input something,
you will get it.
Yeah, you will get it, the result. And of course, to use fertilizers, you need capital. To use machinery, you need capital. So this means that without capital, you could not use these factors. But if you have tractors on the field, you increase, like, for several times maybe the efficiency of your agricultural techniques.
And I write down for myself. So for land perspective, we have just a 10-15% from all optimistic scenarios. We can add another 10-50%.
Yeah.
It's a maximum.
Yeah.
But from demand perspective,
I could say less than 10%.
Less than 10%.
Less than 10%.
But from demand perspective, we should have at least 2 times from calories perspective and kg perspective. Yeah, I mean total food perspective. Yeah. So only these two gaps within, we need 2 times more, but we can add only 10% of the land. Yeah.
That's the main challenge for food production in 21st century.
Okay.
I don't see any solutions. And when we are talking about the vertical farming or something like this, I want to tell you, you need to think about the scale, about the area of agricultural lands at Earth. It's a 30% of the total land area, what we now are using in agriculture. And 90% of this we are using for animal growth, because we need more milk and more meat. We couldn't cut this area because the people who are struggling for reforestation, they ask, okay, if we cut the meat consumption and milk consumption 2 times, we could cut in 2 times the area for grazing. If we cut it, we could increase for 30% the area for forests. But it doesn't work. It's a big project. So that is why every time when I'm talking about my proposal about this, what is the solution? The solution is not the climate change struggling. Okay, we could fight with the climate change, but we need to create the 100-year program for the world. It should be the program with participating all countries, including G20 countries. But we know that in 50 years from now, the G20 will be for 80% from sub-Saharan African countries, because the population of sub-Saharan countries will increase from 1 billion today to 4 billion in 80 years from now.
It will be G40.
Yeah, it will be the largest cities in the world, one of the biggest food consumption area, agricultural, power plants, and so forth. So we will I will tell about this in the next webinar.
Do you think if the gap so big between future demand, I mean, not future, it's just 30 years. From industry perspective, 30 years is nothing, yeah? And so demand is at least 2 times more, but at the same time, we can add just 10-15% from the land perspective. And it's just a land perspective.
And from animal heads. That is why I understand. We will see 2 times more animal heads in 30 years. That is why I'm sure we will see 2 times more methane emission in 30 years. Because we couldn't change this. This is the tsunami. This tsunami is here. We couldn't stop it like and say, okay, please wait, like the 3rd and the 4th wave countries, please wait. And some experts are talking about this idea. They're saying, okay, could we, maybe these countries will not grow so fast like China demonstrated, and Mexico and Brazil and another 30 countries. Maybe these countries will grow slowly, or maybe they will grow fast. We know from many forecasts of a professional experts.
And none of any commercial companies, I mean, some companies, corporates, don't have the influence enough to change this, yeah? I mean, not the government perspective, I mean, private sector.
Yeah, everybody, yeah, because all the corporations, according to their charter, according to their business approach, they are interested only in looking the new opportunity for new product, for new markets, for making more money, and so forth, so forth. So that is a big topic for discussion. How to save our future, and how to go through this next 100 years and to build the prosperous world and sustainable world in the 22nd century, and not to destroy the Earth, the biosphere, right, through this 100-year transition.
So we can say Walmart or Amazon or let's say Alibaba in the next 20 years, if they will still be alive, they will be not only IT company, but also maybe food company, because the demand will be super huge on this sector.
Yes, and I'm sure that like in our webinars, we will explain, and we will explain more or less clear where are the main regions and where are the main sectors which will grow like from 2 to 30 times in the next 50 years, because we know it for sure.
Okay. I think
it's not, the world is not like the world. If you are making business in Austria, or if you are making business in some specific state in the US, you are making business in a very small market.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Earth, at the planet, you will see that, okay, there are 4 billion people existing right now. This is the market for them, because they are still in the level, in the agrarian era. They will come from agrarian era to urban, new dietary, new demography, new energy, new everything. But the 4+ billion people happen in the same regions when we have right now these 3rd and 4th wave countries. So this is mega market, or not a market. We are living not in a market, we are living in the Earth.
Okay. Alexander, we have another question from Marek. Marek, can you ask this question by yourself?
Sure. So it was interesting for me to hear the numbers from the FAO and about the growth in fertilizer use. And I presume that when they were writing these predictions, they had some comments about the sustainability of such fast rising fertilizer use. What were their comments about it? What did they say? That yes, it's going to grow by double or triple amounts in the next 150 years, but how do they see that actually as achievable?
Yeah, I could show you the nice slides I have for this, but the interesting thing is that now we are living in the period of, I could say, the global turbulence. And the reason for this global turbulence is clear: the climate change and the other problems, what we get now, right now. And we understand we need, from the perspective of demand, of feeding the world, we need to increase for this number food production, fertilizer using, energy using, and they draw this graph, and then they start to calculate different scenarios using these models and computer models and so forth. And then you could see a lot of publications with these different scenarios that, okay, we will reach 200 million tons of nitrogen fertilizers by the end of this century. Now we have 100 million tons, and we will reach 200 million. But if we use less, this, we could cut it 10%. If we use this approach, we could cut in another 10%. And if you could, and you could see the same, these graphs and this computer modeling for the most important sectors, like for example, for oil, for internal combustion engine, yeah, and for transition to new renewable batteries, yeah. You will see the focus about the oil production. Okay, now we have 100 million barrels per day, and in 10 years, the number of cars will double in the world. So that means that we will see 2 times more oil. No, because the engine efficiency will increase, yeah, and we will cut for 40%. And then we will go from ICE to EV engines for 30% of this total number. So it will cut the demand for oil. And you will see these gaps, and you don't understand the future, because the demand could be 2 times higher or 40% less from now. This is horrible. This is the worst situation for analysis, for investing, especially for long-term investing. We could not predict because we don't understand what scenario is realistic. So that is why, like, reading all these publications about the more or less long-term perspective, like for 50 or 80 years, is like computer gaming. But because I am the practical, like, industry person, yeah, with experience in industry. So I believe in a trends, in the long-term trends. So that is why I understand that if we could not reach these numbers, we will see this situation, the horrible situation, with the conflicts, with the problems, with the, I don't know, demonstration, with the revolutions in the countries and so forth, because food is so sensitive topic for people, and this is millions of people.
Yeah, but I think even if we're back to the growth of demand, expecting demand, yeah, from 2 to 10 times, even smallest range, 2 times, already give a kind of feelings. Okay, what does it mean, even if it will be smallest one?
Yeah.
And if you even plan to this part, smallest part, you can already understood a lot of things, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So, Alexander, thank you for our third webinar about feeding the world. And I think even I listened it, this is not my first time, and we a little bit prepared to this webinar. I always listen as a first time because it's very hard to digest this information, not just to listen and prepare. I can imagine how much energy is consumed just to fix it as a whole idea.
I hope I helped you to transform a little bit your point of view on the world, on the future, and now you could think more intensively what to do, what should we do, what is doable, what is like unrealistic. And so that's the main problem with a lot of this massive bombardment of information what people receive right now. Because, okay, you see, you could read the FAO forecast, and you'll see, okay, we need, according to this forecast, this is professional organization, the meat demand or meat production will double, at least will double by 2050. This is the next 30 years. And you know it, and you digest it and go further. But if you think about it a little bit, you understand. That means that now we produce 330 million tons or billion kilograms, because average person, average man consume 40 kilograms from our 4 billion people. And in 30 years, we will consume the same, not same amount, we will consume like 60 kilograms. But that means that we need to produce for 330 billion kilograms more every year, more. And in 2050, exactly 2 times more than now. That is, for example, when we are talking about artificial food industry, what is the potential for this industry? I could say the potential for this industry is 300 billion kilograms a year. Is it huge? Because we could not afford to increase the number of animals, as I said, because of climate change. If we need to cut the emission, not to increase it for 2 times, we need to cut the number of heads, not to, but we couldn't cut. We need to increase. So that is all this complicated relationship between topics.
Okay, I think we're done for today. Alexander, thank you for the webinar and see you next time.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.